The arrogant professor dismissed a simple woman. Minutes later his own logic collapsed publicly. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the main character. Emily Johnson sat quietly at the back of the lecture hall, wearing a simple sweater and jeans. She didn't stand out. She wasn't the star student or the one who frequently raised her hand, but she had always been diligent and hardworking. She preferred to keep to herself, focusing on her studies. Unlike the other students in the room, Emily wasn't caught up in the competition to impress the professor or the peer pressure that came with being in a prestigious institution. Her focus was solely on learning, and on a quiet Saturday morning, she entered Professor Richard Harrington's advanced calculus class ready to listen and learn. Professor Harrington was everything you would expect from a man of his stature, sharp, assertive, and with an air of arrogance that filled the room. He was well known for his expertise and his disdain for students who didn't measure up to his standards. As the class settled in, he started with a complex problem on the board, one that required deep understanding of advanced mathematics. Emily sat back and observed. The professor began to speak with authority, walking the students through the problem. His voice carried confidence, perhaps even a little too much. This equation is beyond the capabilities of most students, he remarked with a smirk. Let's see if anyone in this room is worthy of solving it. The challenge was clear, and it was more than just academic. It was personal. Emily, however, wasn't intimidated. She hadn't come here for approval. As the professor continued to speak, he made a point of glancing at her. I'm sure some of you may try to solve it, he said, but I doubt anyone here can truly grasp it, especially not someone who hasn't shown their worth. His words were cutting, meant to provoke. It was almost as if he was daring her to speak up. The room was filled with the hum of nervous energy, the students unsure of how to react. Emily felt her heart beat a little faster. The professor had noticed her, but not in a way that made her feel acknowledged. It was the kind of notice you get when someone assumes you're not up to the challenge. But Emily was no stranger to challenges. She had faced obstacles in her life that were far greater than the ones Professor Harrington had just thrown in her direction. And it wasn't the first time she had been underestimated. The more he spoke, the more she felt a quiet determination build inside her. She had worked hard to get to this point in her academic journey. She wasn't going to let anyone, least of all this arrogant professor, diminish her accomplishments. As the professor continued to drone on about the supposed impossibility of the problem, Emily's thoughts were clear. She wasn't going to engage in his taunts. She wasn't going to prove anything to him. But she would solve the problem, and she would do it on her own terms. The moment the professor finished writing the equation on the board, he turned to face the class, a smug grin on his face. I'll give anyone the opportunity to walk up here and try to solve this, he said. But be warned, this is no easy feat. I expect no one will be able to handle it. A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but none made a move. Emily raised her hand, the room going quiet. Her calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the tension in the air. Professor Harrington paused for a moment, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. You, Emily, he asked, surprised. You think you can solve this? She nodded, standing up. The eyes of the room followed her as she walked toward the board, her steps deliberate. The professor smirked, confident that she would fail. But as Emily picked up the chalk, a sense of calm washed over her. The moment she started working through the equation, the room fell silent. She moved with precision, breaking down the complex problem step by step. She was not in a rush, each movement was calculated, every calculation accurate. As she reached the final step, she stepped back and looked at the class. The room was stunned. The professor stared at the board, his mouth slightly agape, unable to believe what he was seeing. Emily had done it. Not only had she solved the equation, but she had done so with ease and clarity that made the professor's smug expression falter. The silence in the room was deafening. No one spoke. No one moved. The professor's arrogance had crumbled in front of the class, and all that was left was a stunned, humbled man standing at the front of the room. The class had witnessed a quiet woman take on the impossible and come out victorious. Professor Harrington, once so confident, was left speechless. His logic, his assumptions, had collapsed under the weight of Emily's brilliance. And in that moment, the room understood something that had been clear all along: true intelligence is never to be underestimated. Emily stood there, her hand still gripping the chalk, the silence around her almost deafening. She could feel the weight of the room's gaze on her, the eyes of every student, the disbelief in their stares. The chalkboard was filled with the precise steps of the solution, each line an answer to the question that Professor Harrington had so arrogantly posed. The professor, once so sure that no one could solve the problem, stood motionless. His face, usually composed and confident, was now twisted in shock and confusion. His earlier arrogance had melted away, replaced by a bewildered silence. Emily took a slow breath, stepping back from the board, allowing everyone to process what had just happened. The murmurs started quietly at first, whispers of amazement spreading through the room. "How did she do that?" someone finally muttered. Emily didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her answer was right there on the board, clear and irrefutable. She had shown them all, especially Professor Harrington, that she was not just some average student. She was capable of far more than they had ever imagined. The professor blinked, his mind clearly racing, trying to make sense of what had just unfolded. The pride that had once defined him now seemed hollow. It wasn't just that Emily had solved the equation, it was the ease with which she had done it. No hesitations, no struggles, just a clear and confident execution that left him speechless. For a long moment, he didn't know what to say. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The rest of the class remained quiet, still processing the shocking turn of events. Emily remained calm, her posture relaxed as she walked back to her seat. She didn't feel the need to bask in the glory of the moment. She had simply done what needed to be done. The professor, still at the front of the class, finally managed to speak. I don't understand," he muttered, his voice strained, his usual commanding tone nowhere to be found. Emily looked up, meeting his gaze for the first time since she had walked to the board. "I didn't expect you to," she said quietly, her voice steady. "But it's not about what you expected. It's about what I know." The room was still, everyone hanging on her words. Professor Harrington's face flushed, a mix of embarrassment and frustration. He had been bested by a student he had dismissed, someone he had written off as incapable. In that moment, the power dynamic in the room shifted. No longer was he the all-knowing expert. Emily had taken his place as the one in control. The professor cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "Well, it seems you've proven me wrong," he said, the words coming out reluctantly. Emily gave a small nod, but her expression remained calm. "It's not about proving anyone wrong," she replied. "It's about knowing that, no matter how others see you, your worth isn't defined by their judgment." The class, still in stunned silence, slowly began to process her words. Some students looked at each other, as if unsure whether to speak, while others just stared at the professor, waiting for his next move. Professor Harrington, still recovering from the shock, nodded stiffly. "It seems I misjudged you, Emily," he said, his voice tight. "Perhaps I was too quick to dismiss you." Emily simply nodded again, but this time, a small smile tugged at her lips. She hadn't needed to prove anything to anyone, least of all him. She had done what she knew she was capable of, and that was all that mattered. As she returned to her seat, the professor moved to the board, trying to shift the focus back to the lesson. But the class wasn't quite the same anymore. Emily had broken through the walls that Professor Harrington had so carefully constructed around his ego, and in doing so, she had earned something more valuable than respect. She had earned recognition that no one could take away from her. As the days passed, the atmosphere in Professor Harrington's class shifted. Emily could sense the change, though it wasn't something anyone directly acknowledged. The students who had once whispered behind her back now gave her nods of respect, even if they didn't quite know how to approach her. They had seen her solve the impossible, and in their eyes, she had become something more, someone to be admired. As for Professor Harrington, his demeanor had also changed. He still lectured with the same confidence, but there was an edge to his voice now, something that had never been there before. It wasn't just Emily who had witnessed the unraveling of his logic, it was the entire class. They knew he had been wrong, and it was hard for him to ignore that. One day, after class, as Emily packed her things into her bag, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning around, she saw one of her classmates, Sarah, standing there with a hesitant smile. "Hey, Emily," Sarah began, her voice a little nervous. "I just wanted to say, that was really impressive what you did the other day. I don't think anyone could have solved that problem like you did." Emily smiled politely, but inside, she felt a warmth spread through her. It wasn't about the praise, it was about the quiet acknowledgement that her abilities had been recognized. "Thanks, Sarah," Emily said softly. "I just did what I had to do." Sarah's smile grew wider. "Yeah, but not everyone could have handled it like you. Professor Harrington, he didn't know what hit him." Emily chuckled lightly, though she knew Sarah was right. The professor had been caught off guard, and while Emily didn't enjoy the idea of embarrassing anyone, there was a part of her that felt a sense of justice in the moment. As Sarah walked away, Emily's gaze drifted to the front of the classroom, where Professor Harrington was collecting his papers. He caught her eye for a brief moment, and for the first time since the incident, he didn't look at her with disdain. Instead, there was something almost begrudging in his gaze. He didn't say anything, but his silence spoke volumes. Emily didn't mind. She didn't need his validation. She had proven to herself that she was more than capable. Over the next few weeks, Emily continued to excel in her studies, her quiet confidence growing with each passing day. She had never been the type to boast or seek out attention, but there was an undeniable shift in how she carried herself. She knew she had earned the respect of her peers, and while that was gratifying, it wasn't the reason she kept pushing forward. What mattered to Emily was the knowledge that she could hold her own, no matter the challenge. Then, one afternoon, after another successful exam, Emily was surprised when Professor Harrington called her into his office. Her heart raced a little as she entered, unsure of what to expect. The professor sat behind his desk, looking more composed than usual. "Emily, thank you for coming," he said, his voice calmer than she expected. "I wanted to speak with you about your performance in class." Emily nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I've been thinking about what happened that day," he began, his gaze steady. "And I have to admit, I underestimated you." Emily's breath caught for a moment. She hadn't expected him to apologize, but there was a certain humility in his words that surprised her. "I've seen your work, Emily, and I can't deny that you have a rare talent. I apologize for dismissing you so quickly." Emily blinked, momentarily at a loss for words. She hadn't come here for an apology, but hearing it from him felt like a quiet victory. "Thank you, Professor," she said simply. "I appreciate that." Professor Harrington leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You've earned my respect," he said. "And I think you could go very far in this field if you keep pushing yourself." Emily nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. It wasn't about the respect of one person, but hearing it from him meant something. It meant that her quiet determination had been noticed. As she left his office, Emily felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had proven not only to others but to herself that she was capable of more than she had ever realized. The world might try to dismiss her, but she would always rise above, quietly and confidently. Emily had always believed that her worth wasn't defined by the approval of others. Still, there was something deeply satisfying about being recognized for her abilities. It wasn't about the praise or the validation from her peers, it was about knowing she had earned respect, not through boasting, but through quiet determination. Professor Harrington's acknowledgement had only solidified that belief. Weeks went by, and Emily's reputation in the class continued to grow. No longer was she just the quiet student who sat in the back of the room. She had become a symbol of quiet strength and intelligence, someone who didn't need to prove herself with flashy gestures. Her work spoke for itself. One afternoon, as Emily was walking across campus after a particularly challenging exam, she was stopped by a familiar face. Sarah, the same student who had complimented her months ago, waved her over with a friendly grin. "Hey, Emily," Sarah called, "I was just thinking about how things have changed since that day with the professor." Emily smiled and waved back, making her way over. "Yeah, it's been a bit surreal," she admitted. "But in a good way." Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I've noticed something," she said, glancing around as if making sure no one was listening. "People treat you differently now. Like, they see you differently." Emily didn't respond immediately, taking a moment to process Sarah's words. She hadn't thought much about how her classmates might be viewing her. All she knew was that her work had become the focus, and that was enough for her. "I guess it's just about doing what you're good at, right?" Emily said, shrugging. "That's how I see it," Sarah agreed. "But I think people are starting to realize that you're more than just smart. You've got something more." Emily chuckled, a bit uncomfortable with the attention, but also pleased to hear it. "I'm just doing my best." As they continued talking, Emily couldn't help but notice how much had changed since that day with Professor Harrington. Her own sense of self had grown stronger, more confident. She was no longer trying to fit into a mold or seek approval. She had learned that her value didn't depend on what others thought of her, it came from within. The next few weeks were a blur of exams, projects, and more quiet victories. Emily continued to excel, though her focus remained on the work itself, not on the recognition. But one afternoon, as she was leaving the library, Emily received an unexpected invitation. Professor Harrington had requested a meeting with her. She wasn't sure what to expect, but there was a slight nervousness in her chest as she walked to his office. She knocked on the door and entered when he called her in. Professor Harrington was sitting behind his desk, his usual stern expression softened slightly. "Emily, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Emily sat down, unsure of what this meeting was about. "I've been following your progress in class," he began, "and I must say, I'm impressed. You've consistently gone above and beyond, and I think it's time I acknowledge that." Emily nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "that perhaps you're ready for something more. I'd like to recommend you for a research opportunity. It's a big step, but I think you're more than capable." Emily's heart skipped a beat. A research opportunity? It was something she had always dreamed of but never thought she would be considered for. She looked up at Professor Harrington, who was watching her with a calm expression. I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "Just say yes," he replied with a small smile. "You've earned it." Emily didn't hesitate. "Yes, I'd love to." As she left his office that day, her heart was pounding in her chest. This was it, the opportunity she had been waiting for. It wasn't just about proving herself anymore. It was about continuing to push her limits, to show not just Professor Harrington, but herself, that she was capable of far more than she had ever imagined. The path ahead was uncertain, but Emily was ready to take it, confident in her abilities, and more determined than ever to keep proving to herself that she could overcome any obstacle that came her way. Emily had never imagined how much this research opportunity would change her life. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of papers, experiments, and late nights in the lab. As she dove deeper into the project, she found herself becoming more absorbed in her work than ever before. She was no longer just solving equations or writing papers for class, she was contributing to something bigger, something that could make a real difference. Professor Harrington, who had once dismissed her, now looked at her with a newfound respect. He often stopped by her workspace, watching her work, and occasionally offering advice or a suggestion. At first, Emily had been nervous around him, unsure of how to interact with the man who had once made her feel small. But as time went on, she began to see him differently. He wasn't the same arrogant professor from the beginning. His respect for her had grown, and she could sense it in the way he spoke to her. It wasn't just that she had proven herself in class, it was that she had proven herself to be capable of more than he had ever imagined. One afternoon, as Emily was working late in the lab, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning around, she saw Professor Harrington standing there, holding a cup of coffee. "I've been meaning to speak with you," he said, his tone more serious than usual. Emily raised an eyebrow, setting down the test tube she had been working with. "Is everything okay?" she asked. He nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "I've been reviewing your progress on the project, and I have to say, I'm impressed. I've worked with many students over the years, but he paused, looking at her carefully. "You've got a unique talent, Emily. You've been solving problems that even I struggled with." Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had never expected such direct praise from him. "Thank you, Professor," she said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. He set his coffee cup down on the counter, his expression thoughtful. "I think it's time we take this project to the next level," he said. "I'd like to recommend you for a conference. It's a big opportunity to present your work and network with professionals in the field. I believe you're ready." Emily's heart skipped a beat. A conference? She had never imagined her work would get that kind of attention. But here was Professor Harrington, offering her the chance to showcase her research. She didn't hesitate for a second. "Yes, I'd love to," she said, her voice filled with determination. As she walked out of the lab later that evening, Emily felt a sense of accomplishment like never before. She wasn't just doing well in her studies anymore. She was making a real impact. She had proven to herself and to others that her talent wasn't something to be dismissed. She wasn't the quiet, overlooked student anymore. She was Emily Johnson, a force to be reckoned with in her field. And as she prepared for the upcoming conference, she couldn't help but feel proud of how far she had come. The road had been difficult, but every challenge had made her stronger. She was ready for whatever came next. The conference day arrived faster than Emily had expected. She had spent the past few weeks refining her presentation, perfecting her research, and preparing for the questions she might face. The nerves that once plagued her were now replaced with a quiet excitement. She was ready. Walking into the conference hall that morning, Emily felt a surge of pride. The room was filled with professionals, researchers, and students, all gathered to share their work and ideas. Emily, with her modest background, couldn't help but feel a little out of place among the seasoned experts, but she quickly reminded herself of how far she had come. She wasn't here to shrink back. She was here to showcase her work and prove that she belonged. As she made her way to the registration table, she was greeted by a woman with a warm smile. "Welcome to the conference," the woman said. "Are you presenting today?" Emily nodded, her heart racing just a little. "Yes, I am. I'm Emily Johnson." The woman's smile widened. "It's great to have you here. We've been looking forward to your presentation." Emily blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected such a warm welcome, especially not from someone who likely had years of experience in the field. After signing in and collecting her name badge, Emily made her way to the presentation room. She stood outside for a moment, taking a deep breath. This was it, the moment she had worked so hard for. She wasn't just another student anymore. She was a researcher with something valuable to share. The door opened, and she stepped inside, greeted by a small crowd of attendees. As she set up her presentation, Emily couldn't help but notice that there were several familiar faces in the audience, including Professor Harrington. He gave her an encouraging nod, and for a brief moment, she felt a rush of gratitude for the opportunity he had given her. Once the presentation began, Emily's nerves settled. She spoke confidently about her research, explaining the methodology, the results, and the potential impact of her findings. The room was quiet, all eyes on her, and Emily felt the weight of the moment settle in. This was her time to shine, and she wasn't going to waste it. As she reached the conclusion of her presentation, a hand shot up from the audience. "Miss Johnson, your research is impressive," a man's voice said. "But I'm curious, what's next for your work? What are your plans for the future?" Emily smiled, feeling a surge of confidence. That's a great question, she replied. My next steps will involve further testing and collaboration with other researchers in the field. I believe there's a lot of potential here, and I'm excited to see where it goes. The man nodded thoughtfully, and Emily could see that her answer had left an impression. The questions continued, and each time, she answered with poise and clarity. As the presentation ended, the room erupted into applause. Emily felt a rush of pride, but it wasn't the applause she cared about. It was the validation that came from knowing she had done something truly meaningful. After the session, several attendees approached her with compliments, questions, and even offers for collaboration. Emily felt a sense of belonging she had never felt before. She was no longer just a quiet student in a classroom. She was a respected researcher, and this conference had been her platform to prove it. Later that evening, as she walked back to her hotel, Emily reflected on the day. She had come a long way from the nervous, underestimated student she once was. She had shown the world and herself that she was capable of greatness. And as she thought about the future, Emily knew that this was just the beginning. Emily's journey after the conference felt like a new chapter, one where her hard work and dedication finally began to pay off in ways she had always dreamed of but never quite believed could happen. The days following her successful presentation were filled with emails, offers, and opportunities for collaboration from some of the leading researchers in her field. Emily had always been a quiet, diligent student, never one to seek out the spotlight, but now, the spotlight seemed to be following her, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and gratitude. As she sat in her small apartment that evening, reflecting on everything that had happened, Emily realized how far she had come. The quiet girl from the back of the classroom had now become a respected voice in her field. She had earned the respect of her peers, and more importantly, she had earned it on her own terms. Professor Harrington, who had once underestimated her, had become one of her greatest allies, offering advice and guidance as she navigated this new chapter in her academic career. It was a strange feeling, seeing him in a new light. No longer was he the intimidating professor who had looked down on her. Instead, he had become a mentor, someone who recognized her potential and helped her realize that she was capable of achieving greatness. One afternoon, as Emily was walking through the campus courtyard, she was stopped by a familiar voice. It was Sarah, her classmate from the first day they met. Sarah had become a close friend over the past few months, and the two of them often studied together, bouncing ideas off each other. Emily, I've been meaning to talk to you, Sarah said with a smile. I just wanted to say how proud I am of you. You've really come into your own, and it's inspiring to watch. Emily smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her. Thanks, Sarah, she replied, grateful for the kind words. It's been a wild ride, but I'm just getting started. Sarah raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Emily's smile grew wider. I've got some big plans. I'm not stopping here. There's so much more I want to accomplish. Sarah looked at her with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. I have no doubt you'll do great things. You've already proven that. Emily laughed softly. We'll see. I've got a long way to go. As they continued walking together, Emily's mind raced with possibilities. The conference had been a turning point for her, but she knew it was just the beginning. She had proven herself, yes, but now it was time to push even further, to reach new heights and break new ground in her field. The future was full of opportunities, and Emily was ready to take them all on. She had earned her place, and now it was time to show the world what she could really do. The challenges would come, but Emily was no longer afraid of them. She had faced the biggest challenge of all, proving her worth to herself. And she had done that. Now, it was time to rise to the next challenge with the same quiet determination that had gotten her this far. She wasn't just a student anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. Emily stood at the edge of the campus, staring at the familiar buildings, her thoughts swirling. The past few months had been a whirlwind of success, growth, and realization. She had finally found her place, not just in the academic world, but within herself. After the conference, things had shifted. Emily was no longer just another student. She had become a recognized figure in her field, her work gaining attention from professionals who once seemed out of reach. But with all the praise and opportunities came a new challenge: maintaining that momentum. She had proven she was capable, but now it was about staying ahead, about continuing to push boundaries and reach higher. Emily walked to the library, her footsteps steady, her mind focused. She had always been someone who found comfort in books, in research, in the quiet pursuit of knowledge. It was where she felt most at home. Inside the library, she found a corner by the window, settled into her seat, and pulled out her laptop. The soft hum of the air conditioning and the rustle of pages around her were the only sounds as she began to work. She had a new project in mind, something ambitious, something that could make a real impact. She was ready to take on the next big challenge. As she typed, the door to the library opened, and she looked up to see Sarah walking in, waving enthusiastically. "Hey, Emily," Sarah greeted, her voice full of excitement. "How's everything going?" Emily smiled, closing her laptop. "It's going well," she replied. "I've got a new project in the works, actually." Sarah's eyes lit up. "That's amazing. I knew you'd keep going after that conference. What's the new project about?" Emily leaned back in her chair, feeling the familiar surge of excitement that came with a new idea. "It's focused on developing a more efficient method for analyzing large datasets. I think it could really make a difference in our field, especially with all the advancements in technology." Sarah nodded, clearly impressed. "I have no doubt you'll crush it. You've got that spark, Emily." Emily chuckled. "Thanks, Sarah. But it's not just about the spark. It's about the work, the persistence, the drive to keep going, even when things get tough." Sarah sat down beside her, grinning. "And you've got all of that. You're unstoppable." Emily's smile widened. "I appreciate that. But it's not just me, you know. It's everyone who's supported me along the way. I wouldn't be here without all the encouragement and opportunities I've had." Sarah nodded, her eyes softening. "I get it. You've worked hard, but you've also had people who believed in you. And you've shown them they were right." Emily's heart warmed at her friend's words. "I guess so." The conversation turned to other topics as they spent the rest of the afternoon talking, but Emily's thoughts kept drifting back to the new project. She had a vision, a goal, and now she was more determined than ever to see it through. She had learned so much in the past few months, not just about research, but about herself. She wasn't the same person she had been when she started. She had grown, evolved, and become someone who believed in her own potential. She wasn't afraid of the future anymore. In fact, she was excited for it. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Emily was ready for whatever came next. She had already faced her greatest challenge and come out stronger. And now, she was ready to take on the world, one breakthrough at a time. As the weeks passed, Emily found herself immersed in her work more than ever before. The project she had started after the conference was now taking shape, and she was excited to see how far it could go. She worked late nights and weekends, pushing herself to make the most of this opportunity. The research was going well, and the data she was collecting showed promise. The hard work was paying off, but Emily knew it wasn't just about the project. It was about the journey she had been on. Looking back, she realized just how much she had grown. From the shy student who was overlooked and underestimated, to the confident researcher who now held her own in a room full of professionals, Emily had come a long way. It wasn't just the success that mattered, it was the belief in herself that had transformed her. One evening, after finishing up a particularly challenging experiment, Emily sat at her desk and looked out the window. The campus was quiet, the soft hum of the city outside the only sound. For a moment, she let herself reflect on everything she had accomplished. She had faced so many doubts along the way, from others and even from herself. But with each challenge, she had pushed through, proving time and time again that she was more than capable. A knock at the door brought Emily out of her thoughts. She turned to see Professor Harrington standing there, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said with a slight smile. Not at all, Emily replied, surprised to see him. I'm just wrapping up some work. He stepped inside and sat across from her. I wanted to check in on your progress, he said. From what I've heard, your project is going exceptionally well. Emily felt a wave of gratitude for his support. It's been challenging, but I'm getting there, she said. I couldn't have done it without your encouragement. Professor Harrington nodded. I've been following your work closely, he said. And I have to admit, I'm impressed. You've exceeded my expectations, and I'm proud to see how far you've come. Emily smiled, a sense of pride welling up inside her. Thank you, Professor. That means a lot to me. There was a brief pause, and then Professor Harrington spoke again. I think it's time for you to take the next step. I've spoken with some colleagues, and we all agree that your work is ready for wider exposure. I'd like to recommend you for a research grant. It's a big opportunity, and I believe you're ready for it. Emily's heart skipped a beat. A research grant? This was the kind of opportunity she had only dreamed about. That's incredible, she said, almost unable to believe it. I'd be honored. Professor Harrington smiled. I thought you'd say that. I'll make the necessary arrangements and let you know the details. As he left her office, Emily sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by a sense of accomplishment. This was the kind of recognition she had worked for, the kind that validated all the sacrifices and hard work. She had come so far, and now the world was opening up to her in ways she had never imagined. The road ahead was still long, but Emily knew one thing for sure: she was ready for whatever came next. She had proven to herself that she was capable of achieving anything she set her mind to. And now, with the support of those around her and the belief in her own abilities, she knew she could accomplish even more.